morning, and thank you for joining us. We begin this meeting by acknowledging and honoring the land on which we gather, now known as the Niagara region, is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples, many of whom continue to live and work here today. I'm Dolores Fabiano, Executive Director of the South Niagara Chambers of Commerce, and on behalf of the Niagara Chamber Partnership, which includes Fort Erie, Grimsby, Lincoln, Niagara Falls, Niagara-on-the-Lake, Thorold, Port Colborne, Waynflete, Welland Pelham, and West Lincoln Chambers, I'm thrilled to be able to kick off our second session in this informative series. This time around, we'll be focusing on 6 issues that are impacting our Niagara business community. We'll be presenting you with 6 thought-provoking conversations featuring local perspectives. These conversations will allow us to reflect on challenges and opportunities and hopefully provoke some new thoughts. I want to thank our tech sponsor, B4 Networks. Thank you, Brian LaChapelle and your team. We're also incredibly fortunate to have John Armstrong from Armstrong Communications, a longtime champion for our local chambers, as the moderator for this series. I'm looking forward to a great conversation. Take it away, John.
Thank you very much, Dolores. And yes, it's terrific to be back for the second leg of Niagara's Road to Recovery series. We do have a strong lineup of sessions over the course of the next number of weeks. Today's session is working on the return to work as we slowly inch our way out of COVID, hopefully. And we are joined today by a terrific panel to talk about this subject. We're joined by Robin Murray, Human Resources Manager from Stanpack, Alou McCabe from Trusted Time, and Laura Tolhoek from Essential HR. Laura, I hope I said your name properly.
You're good. Don't worry.
So thank you very much for joining us. A number of companies are starting to put in some protocols and practices, and actually lots of them have them going on now. I'm sure you folks have some as well and have some good advice for people who are watching. So maybe we could begin by talking about what some of those best practices and protocols are. Who'd like to start us off? Laura, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So, John, one of the things that I want to say to begin with is this is such a unique environment, and an individual business, whether small, medium, or large, is not going to be able to copy somebody else's program and protocols, because each environment has its own issues, has its own opportunities, and has its own unique perspectives that are needed. For example, some environments, recruitment is so tough right now that the concept of losing 5 or 10% of the workforce would decimate the business. Other companies are not in that position. So taking into account what the individual industries is, I think, the first thing that we need to do. So cut and pasting a policy from somebody else and trying to format it for your environment might not be the best practice. Right.
Murray, Robin, sorry, what's your experience at Stanpack?
Well, as an essential business in manufacturing, we haven't necessarily experienced what some of the other companies may have experienced with, workforce totally working from home and whatnot. So we've had to sort of weather that storm while continuing operations. And of course, a lot of what we're doing is just following the public health directives that have come out for the workplaces. We've done things such as expanding our lunchroom, adding partitions in the cafeteria area. We expanded our outdoor eating area in order to accommodate folks outside of the cafeteria, because, as you know, we do have a limit on how many people can be in certain rooms together. So, with a lot of mixed messaging at the beginning, we did have to work very closely with the public health directives and figure out exactly how that would impact Stanpack. And I would say that just our overall environment and the response from our employees has been very positive and has allowed us to keep going. We haven't really encountered many issues where we've found that people are against, the regulations that are being asked of us. So I would say overall, yes, we've had some challenges, but we've kept going and we've managed to weather that storm as best we can.
Yeah, so you were an essential business. So,
Yeah.
so your manufacturing continued.
Mhm.
You do have a front office, however, and how is the sort of the way you're dealing with front office versus the shop floor? How does that differ?
Well, I mean, the departments, service different areas of the company. So, for example, accounting, purchasing, even HR to some degree was able to work from home. A lot of our customer service reps were able to work from home. So we were able to accommodate that. Prior to COVID-19, we actually had already introduced a work from home policy. So we had already had a policy in place around that, which served us well when everything, came down the pipe in March of 2020 and people were heading home and having to work right out of their homes. So we've adapted very well, and we have people working different hours to accommodate their lifestyles at home. As you know, kids being home from school was an issue for parents and needing to work full time as well. So we offered a lot of flexibility in those working hours for our customer service reps, particularly the largest group in the office of women who would need to be considering their childcare needs at home. So I would say that from that perspective, we've maintained that and continued that on. We did, of course, have some individuals in the office who felt that they could better serve the company actually right in the office. So they chose to stay home. But overall, we've carried that forward. Some people are trickling back in a little bit more now. But I would say that the majority of the people who chose to work from home have continued to do so, and we've continued with the flexibility in that area.
Alou, what are you experiencing, or what kind of best practices or protocols do you have for people who may be listening?
One of the things that really has proven to be a challenge is this sudden transition, right? So much to what Robin was saying. Teleworking is not a new concept. I mean, quite frankly, one of the researchers in 1985 echoed, then it would be the next working environment, revolution. But that's if it's voluntary. What's happened is this has caused a shock in the psychological contracts of people, which really is the mechanism that explains satisfaction and wellness within the workplace. So we have, your written contracts, but there's also the psychological contracts, a set of expectations and quid pro quo relationships that happen. So PC theory has been researched forever because there is a direct correlation between that and engagement and retention and certain attitudes and behaviors, job satisfaction, job insecurity. Unfortunately, a lot of businesses don't pay much attention to that because they don't understand the impact of it. Well, now the environment's been shocked, and the theories are really supported by the data and the research that's out there that we need to be paying attention to the psychological state, which is trust and perceived fairness in the work environment. Was a research put up by Visor saying that this is mostly affecting people in the 30 to 40, so mid-range employees, which is why you'll see from Niagara Workforce Planning Board, there is a higher unemployment rate, yet we can't find the people because they're taking pause, right? And we need to be, as supervisors and managers and leadership, resetting those psychological contracts so that they're aligning with the environment. But the other problem is no one's actually been trained to do this. No one's been put in this pandemic or shocking situation to be, and now we have a platform where we need to be able to encourage a retraining of our leadership, a retraining on those conversations, because the uncertainty, creates it supports the affective events theory, which really says, if something negative happens to me, it causes an emotional reaction, and that'll affect my engagement at work. But then you have the flip side of supervisors who haven't been trained in this scenario, which refers to the agency theory, which really says, if I don't see you, I don't actually know you're doing your work. And I don't know how to measure you, and I don't know how to manage you. I mean, Robin's group, fantastic, right? That you've been able to sort of take the environment and do the best you can with it and have good positive reactions, but that's not the reality for a lot of small businesses. I'm sure Laura has encountered as well. So we really need to take a moment and say, okay, we have all these policies in place. This is what the government is saying. This is what the workforce is saying. How do we get people back in? How do we get them to want to stay? And because of the shock in the environment, it really will be a different type of recruitment in the world. It's no longer just your Indeeds or, you know, or your LinkedIn. It really is the people in the organization creating that certainty for the workforce outside. We find that a lot of people are shifting careers rather than shifting the idea to work because the environment has changed so much.
Yeah, very interesting, Laura. I know that I remember the first wave of COVID. Everyone was, oh, this working from home thing is, you know, that's fantastic. This is great. Second wave of COVID hits, and it's kind of like, well, this isn't really great anymore. And then, you know, the third wave of COVID hits, and people are kind of, I kind of like it. I don't really like it. I want to kind of get back to normal. I want to get back into the office. And the fourth wave, everybody, I think, just has a level of disorientation and trying to acclimatize themselves to that kind of to those kinds of different attitudes and perceptions. I don't know what you're experiencing and how companies are dealing with that kind of chaos.
Well, I think the initial thought is, look how productive people can be at home. And that's been the newspaper article. That's been the headline. Look how much, no commute, no, you know, additional time, no water cooler conversations that waste the time. But this is the problem. And I don't know, ladies, if you've experienced this as well this morning, is on a typical day where we would have had this conversation in person, my morning would have been get the kids out the door, make sure I look good, get to wherever we are meeting, have a nice conversation with you guys, get relaxed, cup of coffee, have a 10 o'clock to 11 o'clock meeting, go home, have some lunch, start my workday probably around 12:30. My morning this morning, because of Zoom, was get the kids out the door. I had 2 conversations, got a couple of emails out, jumped onto this call. And as soon as we're done, I've got 3 things lined up before I eat lunch. So this idea that we're more productive is actually kind of hitting us on the back end as causing more stress as well. Because of having one conversation with a potential client, customer, whatever, we're having 4, which in turn makes us have 4 times as much work on the back end to get all of that done. And we're forgetting that part of the work from home. So when people are stressed, it's not just because there was kids at home or is kids at home. We are actually creating an environment that causes more problems due to the amount of pressure that people have on themselves to be productive. On the flip side, and I want to tell this quick story because I think this is one of the other things that we need to be very aware of. I have a client who they sent an email, said, Laura, what do I do? And they got notification that there was a GoFundMe for one of their employees who was in severe anorexia and bulimia. Now, they had been working from home. Nobody knew. For a year, this individual was suffering and nobody knew because all you see is head up and everything looks good. And whereas if they had been in an office environment, people would have been noticing this and rallying around and supporting. But because of the Zoom environment, because of this remote environment, they weren't able to accurately assess who was on their team and what was going on really with the mental health of their team. And I think that's another one of those aspects. I'm sure we're going to talk about, how to support teams in remote environments, because it is very different than in that physical. But there's things that are going on with our teams that we have no idea of, that they're not going to bring up in a video call unless it's dire straits. So I think there's some opportunities there as we think what is best for our teams to make sure that we're supporting both the physical, the mental health, and the workload of what we expect people to do.
Yeah. Although I'm fascinated by both of your comments around the psychological contract, as well as the notion of trust and perceived fairness.
Yes.
kind of particularly look at the notion of the psychological contract and the way you were talking about the speed at which things are changing, and which the speed at which things changed, because what we what we were also feeling sort of the additional pressures on corporations related to their environmental, social, and governance approaches to business, and that profit is starting to not be the bottom line quite as much as maybe it once was, as we deal with things, as we were dealing with things, particularly climate change and some of the social fairness issues that you were talking about. So do you think that there's going to be an acceleration in companies and corporations as they deal with and adequately deal with that the psychological contract and notions of fairness? What are your thoughts?
So the reality is, I'm going to piggyback on what Laura said, because she said something really profound here. She said it's not all it's cut out to be, right? There are pros and cons to this working from home, where people are finding themselves in these endless demands now between family, work, because you're quite frankly, if you really wanted to be, you could be more productive, way more productive. But this has caused a forced or involuntary breach in the psychological contract. And if we don't understand this, it's going to cause major problems, because the PC theory and the psychological contract, through data and through research, quite frankly, to our research that I did with the Chamber as well and Niagara Workforce Planning Board, supports the theory that a breach has a negative correlation, direct monotonic correlation to retention or engagement. And it has a positive correlation. And this is the main catalyst for this is perceived supervisor support. Here's the problem. We now have an involuntary breach. Supervisors not been trained to handle this. They don't even know what, half of them would not even know what the psychological contract is. I mean, quite frankly, many people don't, because it's not a golden horseshoe thing. It's not something we've dealt with. This has been a handshake down. You either do the job, I know Joe, who knows Bob, who knows this, or it's your assembly line, right? Those are pretty much what we're dealing with in this area. We're seeing a lot more influx of people as people's mindsets are growing, but the reality is we are not trained on how to handle psychological contracts. Now, fulfillment of psychological contracts are directly linked to engagement and retention, whereas but if breach is allowed to continue without training the leadership on these facets, it turns to violation. And when you get to violation, two things happen: turnover intentions, which is I quit, Robin, and I'm moving to Laura, or intention to quit, I'm just done. Because we're not handling what is happening in this quid pro quo relationship that we originally had in our existing work-life pattern. So our jobs as leaders is to be able to identify this, educate our teams, educate our leaderships. It's a new world out there. The pandemic has shaken the environmental landscape, and thus it traverses into the workplace.
So Robin, how's Standpack dealing with it? I think there are a couple of interesting concepts there, and get your personal reflection as well around the notion of when there isn't supervision, there are these concerns about productivity, and some of the outcome of that may be similar to what Laura was talking about, where things like virtual meetings like Zoom and these kinds of things can actually create a hyper productivity, partially because you can do it, right? Which kind of gets people feeling good because of that level of efficiency that you're creating. But it also has the potential to create additional burnout, and then also potentially even creates a level of expectation in your employer around your ability to operate at that kind of hyper speed. So how's Standpack dealing with that, and you personally?
Yeah, well, from a personal standpoint, I'll touch on that first. I totally understand, what Alu and Laura are getting at about, it's not all it's, chalked up to be, because for the first little while, personally working from home, I started to feel a little bit disengaged from the rest of the company. As an HR manager, I feel it's very important to be present for all employees, whether they're working from home or they're working right on the production floor. So I personally was feeling a pull to come into work more. And at first it was a little bit challenging because it was work at home as much as you can. And then things started to ease up and we were able to start coming back into the workplace a little bit more. I myself work in the office 3 days a week and I work from home 2 days a week because my productivity when I'm in the office is actually a little bit lower than when I'm at home personally, because I have a lot of people that come in and out of my office. They're looking for guidance on various issues. Maybe I need to meet with somebody for an interview or something to that effect. So I'm actually able to really hunker down at home and focus on my tasks there. But when I come into the office, I know, okay, I may not need to focus on as many tasks now. I need to make myself available for people and to get out on the floor and, sort of walk the park, so to speak, and let people know that I actually am there. From my team's perspective, we agreed that we did need HR presence in the office. So my team, rotates in and out, working from home and working in the office. As far as productivity goes with other teams, I think we're fortunate enough to say that there really hasn't been too many areas of concern that have come up. One or two things that I know of where we've had people come back into the office because something got missed. We know that there is a bit of a snowball effect with certain departments. If you miss something here, it's going to heavily impact down the line. So we've really created a nice hybrid model that allows for people to come in. As far as breaches of trust go, I don't think we've really seen that happen. If it has happened, it's addressed immediately. And I think that's really key in these situations is communicating with your staff and ensuring that you have open lines of communication. When you have somebody working from home and you've got somebody else in the office, obviously the person who might be in the office may see the person working from home as not working as hard as them. So I really think it's up to the leadership teams to set the tone and the culture and the understanding of what it means to work from home. And if you do have an individual concern about somebody you're working with that you maybe think is not pulling their weight, again, I come back to those open lines of communication and ensuring that the employees know that the channels are there and that, it's really important to address issues as they come up immediately rather than waiting, 3, 4, 5 weeks to address it. So I would say, really, really focus on the communication. As far as engagement goes in the office, now that things are opening up a little bit more and we've been able to get out in the public a little bit more, I think various teams are doing things here and there. Maybe 6 people go to a restaurant and have a lunch together and catch up that way. Or we've done some golf days where we've gotten some people out and had some fun that way. And I really think it's important to maintain the culture, whether people are at home or whether we're working directly in the office, because otherwise it gets lost, people become disengaged, and then we see those retention issues start to crop up. And if you don't mind, I would just like to comment on one more thing. We have talked about the mental health side of things. I also, want to make sure people who are working from home are considering their physical well-being, getting up from the computer, walking around, doing stretches, and taking their eyes off the screen for a little bit, because I can tell you from my personal standpoint, there could be 4 hours that go by and I realize, oh my goodness, I didn't get up yet. I better get up and walk around. So the overall health and well-being of employees, both on-site and off-site, is very integral right now.
Boy, there's a lot of meaty stuff in there. I got too many words written down. I've got maintaining culture and engagement. I've got setting employer expectations. there's a lot to unpack in there, in terms of as well creating hybrid environments. I don't know which one you want. I don't know which one or all of them if you want to take on, Laura. But why don't we stick with your original comment about sort of that hyper productivity world that we now operate in, and then we'll move to the when you're not as active side of that equation. What kind of expectations do you think an employer, or how do employees and employers set expectations when when you're in a work at home environment, or you're in a kind of a hybrid environment? Do you have any counsel there?
Yeah, so I think when we're in this hybrid environment or work from home environment, as a whole, industry, businesses, we like to think we communicate a lot. And the fact of the matter is we don't communicate near enough. We've thought about it as business leaders, we've thought about a concept, we've thought about an objective, a strategic way that we want to do things, and we've thought about it overnight, we've thought about it through the night, we've thought about it for weeks on end, and we've given it to our leadership teams, and we've explained it to them, and we expect it to go all the way through the organization, and people adopt it and run with it in the same way that we've thought about it for the last 3 months. And instead of doing, town halls and one-on-ones and actually having a communication plan, we just give a top-down email direction and expect everybody's adoption. And that's even more heightened in this environment. So the idea that we don't communicate enough as businesses in general is heightened when we start coming into this remote work environment, because we think an email solves all problems. And unless we are these incredible killer communicators that can really, pull a punch with one email, it's often not the case. And then we wonder, where have we gone wrong? Because people aren't grasping the direction that we're moving in, or grasping the culture that we're trying to implement, because all we've done is, maybe done one town hall or done one email, and there's no pull of that communication through the organization. So when it comes to clear expectations of what you want your team to do, unfortunately, it's not as easy as, having a one-on-one with somebody and just saying, I need you to do this better. It's going to take repeated communication. It's going to take engagement on behalf of the supervisors. And I think, Alu, you hit it on the head, is we have a deficit of leadership training in our supervisory levels. And it's no fault of the supervisors. We have this crazy environment going on right now where we're promoting people in the last 3 to 5 years and not investing in them as leaders. And I, for one, can say, I was not naturally born with management skills. I was not naturally born with the ability to have hard conversations with ease. All of that takes time and practice. And unless you invest in the training of those people, you're going to wonder why you're trying to build this great communication culture or this great culture in your organization, and the frontline teams just don't get it. And it's because everything in the middle has a problem. And we're not investing in those middle managers who really drive the engagement of our teams. So when someone says there is no job clarity in my role, when someone says, I don't see how my work is part of the bigger picture, it comes right down to that clarity and that relationship between the supervisors and the frontline teams. And Alu, I can see you. I know you have some great insight right here, so I don't want to throw it to you because I know you're going to come in with a punch here.
Yes, as you were talking, like scribbling. Laura's absolutely right. Okay, pre-COVID, we already had a training issue. Now we don't have, Robin Stanback's got Robin really, so that's great. There's an HR team there, but most Niagara is a SME type of small to medium-sized enterprise. A lot don't have HRs, or quite frankly, if they do, it's clerical. HR strategy needs to back up the business strategy in order for the business to continue to be competitive. But in order to do that, they have to leverage human capital. So Laura says, 3 to 5 years, we've hired all these people, they've done good at their jobs, we've made them supervisors. I would even argue, let's go further back 20 years, right? This is what we do. Hey, you're good at what you do, let's promote you, but we're not going to train you how to do that. Now that's pre-COVID. Imagine today. These are the same people who didn't know how to do it pre-COVID. How are they going to navigate this atmosphere? So of course it's going to create more chaos, because they themselves are trying to figure out, why am I feeling this? Why is this happening to me? John suddenly coming into work and he's grumpy or he's in a mood. Let's just ignore him. What do you think is going to happen 6 months from now? John's either going to quit, hit somebody, get fired, or you're paying someone to just be there because it's too expensive to exit him out because he's been there for 20 years. We need to focus on the psychological contract. We need to train our leaders on how to focus on the psychological contract. And all this is banded in theory that's been researched up the wazoo, if you don't mind me saying. And we did it ourselves. We created this research, which we're going to be talking about at a later date, I think this week. But really, 570 people spoke up in Niagara saying the exact same thing. So there's some truth to this. And I'm going to echo what Laura says. We need to invest in our people. If we're going to consider them leaders, we need to give them leadership training, especially now with the change of environment, because this isn't going away. The environment has changed. There are going to be nuances. COVID vaccinations, non-vaccinations, 6 to 11, nuances. But the environment is such that it's literally shifted. We need to be able to shift the workplace so it aligns with it so that we can attract people. People still want to come to work. The economy keeps moving. It really is an important conversation.
So what you're talking about is really, we've heard an enormous amount about the additional mental health challenges that companies are expecting coming out of COVID. I mean, we knew that prior to COVID, mental health issues were the fastest growing concerns when it came to lost time and workplace, highest cost on their insurance on the insurance side. But what you're really talking about something that is related to dealing with people's mental health, but is different, because when you think of dealing with somebody's mental health, you really kind of think of, we need to get them the mental health supports, and those mental health supports are provided by healthcare professionals. What you're talking about, Olu, is really something that's related, but actually very, very different. So maybe you could talk a little bit about, actually all of you can talk a little bit about sort of that relationship between that mental health and that kind of that psychological contract that we're experiencing. Actually, before I go to you, Olu, why don't we kick off with Robin on that? How are you managing sort of that the mental health piece combined with the notion of training people who are utterly untrained to deal with some of these issues?
Training is absolutely, forefront of my thinking right now because of what we're seeing with the drop off in applicants. I'd almost like to focus our shift to let's just really hone in on retention. So, we certainly want to provide all of our supervisors with the opportunities to better their skills and to be able to come back, to the floor and to their teams with more developed approaches to leadership. And of course, with COVID in the last little while, that has been a challenge, and bringing in somebody. We've in the past done a lot of lunch and learns, and with our gathering limitations, that has become a challenge, of course. And the training, it really needs to be something that is going to work for all those that are signing up for it. And my personal belief right now, looking at the workforce here at Stampak, is that my supervisors don't want to sit on a Zoom call, and they're not going to take away anything from a Zoom call when they can still have their phone in front of them. They can still be responding to emails. They don't have to be overly engaged. It becomes a challenge. So it is certainly something we're trying to figure out as we go. What is the best way to train our supervisors or train our mid-level managers and get them to the right point. So one of the things that I started doing was compiling what I called HR bites. And essentially, these were monthly newsletters that would go out on topics around engaging your workforce, finding your work-life balance. How can we work with our teams and develop them and get them up to a higher, more engaged level? So a lot of those, that's where we're at with some of the training is having to rely on our folks here to take it upon themselves to do a little bit of training until we can start getting back into, you know, the person-to-person training. And I think that since COVID has reared its ugly head, has certainly created a very significant challenge for all organizations. And that is going to directly impact every single person that we need to get trained up further. We're kind of in a standstill. We're not able to get as forward as we'd like because of the limitations that we're experiencing.
Yeah. So Laura, what are your thoughts as it relates to the notion of the mental health issues and mental health concerns, the escalation that was happening even pre-COVID, now escalating now, combined with the concepts that Lou was talking about related to the fact that there hasn't been adequate training at the supervisory level in order to deal with the psychological contract, those related issues, and to the other point, I guess that we're talking about is that we're in such a period of dramatic change that everybody is writing the book right now. So there isn't really a book to be followed on this. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think the term mental health has so many variances. So we have everything from people coming in with anxiety, and then we have all the way to mental health crises. And oftentimes when we label the whole thing mental health, it gets scary for employers because even as an HR person, I am not trained in mental health. My background was not from a social work or from a psychology standpoint. So when it comes to mental health crisis, that is something that's out of my wheelhouse. But what we've come to learn is that there's a lot of little signs along the road where it's not mental health as a personal issue that affects business. It's mental health is something that comes into play both with the personal side and the business side. And the business has a role in ensuring that people's mental health is protected. There's actually 13 different points where mental health and business culture and business health intersect. Some of those things being like the balance, the workload, the team feel, the harassment, that side of harassment and violence, and how integrated people are with their teams, the leadership. And those are things that the business has control over. And it's hard, I'll be honest, it's hard as a business to look at 13 items and 13 ideals and say, where do we even start? And instead of starting, we just throw it out because 13 ideals seems extremely overwhelming as a small business. But it's finding those places of opportunity where we can say, just as you said before, John comes in with a bad day, and it is easier to not have that conversation with John, because if I have the conversation with John, that's going to be emotionally draining for me. It's probably going to add things to my to-do list, and there's probably going to be some kind of repercussion down the road where I now have to take responsibility for what's going on with John because I asked the question. So there's all of these things that play in our mind on a Tuesday morning when John comes in grumpy, and instead of having the conversation that could potentially save the relationship, the workplace relationship, the efficiency of what you're doing every day, we just put it aside. And that's where that whole intersection of mental health and business really comes into play. And that's where the understanding of personal life intersecting and not siloing it will have an effect on the bottom line of business, because the last thing we want is people to quit and stay. It's worse than quit and leaving. That quit and stay is what's draining the resources of our organizations. And at the end of the day, it's our responsibility to turn those around or show them that maybe this is no longer the place that they need to be if we can't turn that situation around.
So how important do you think then that just to thread it into the conversation, that notion of training at the supervisory level to begin to deal with some of those issues? I mean, I'm sure at the kind of the higher levels, I think what we're talking about, a lot of these things don't filter down into the where they need to go to get applied. So what are your thoughts around training at the supervisory level for some of these things that, quite frankly, none of the folks who have those supervisors jobs probably certainly are been trained for, had the skills to do, and maybe not even the inclination or the interest? How do you deal with those?
And that's the thing, you know, we have this term in HR, the angel effect, where I like you because you're like me. And it's, the same is true. John, I don't know how you work. I don't know what you're motivated by. It's clearly not the same things I'm motivated by. So you do you, and just make sure you get your job done. And we kind of disassociate because as supervisors and leaders, we're not training people how to manage people individually. We're letting them take their own leadership style and applying it to everybody. And situational leadership is a great, you know, training program for that, which I've found a lot of value in. But it's that idea that the supervisor has one way of leading, and we haven't told them that there's a different way of leading. And we haven't told them that if they have 5 people, they need to lead those 5 people in 5 different ways.
Right. Alu, what are your thoughts?
I'd like to take us a step back into our environment. We're mostly small and medium-sized enterprises. What does that mean? That there's more ambiguity without an HR department. There's more ambiguity in the relationship. I, as an employee, have to fill those gaps in my head. How's this relationship going? What is expected of me? How am I going to get measured? What am I supposed to do? Oh, shoot, he's mad at me, but he never told me this, right? These gaps are being filled in my head. And that is what forms the psychological contract because of the ambiguity around it. Now, like Laura said, there's some things that point to attitudes and behaviors, which, you know, you can measure in scales, which job insecurity, job satisfaction, work-life interference, I call it, rather than balance. Self-efficacy, where, you know, it's a big word I call it for confidence, right? And sometimes that's shaken up through this employability organization. These are all great things, and these are all measurable, right? But the HR practices that happen with or without an HR in place, and you could hire fractional HRs like Laura and myself, or you could have a full-blown HR like Robin, irrespective, those practices and those expectations relate directly to the trust relationship and the quid pro quo relationship that is happening. And the consequences of those are, you know, your lack of organizational commitment, maybe job satisfaction or job insecurity. Everything is dependent on that middle ground. And I'm going to take it one step further, and I'm not very popular for this, but I am going to say it. I'm not leaving it at the supervisor level. The supervisors aren't trained because the executives themselves don't see value in this. But now they will. Why? Because the environment forced it. We're almost in a position like, guys, you got to get on board with this, because competitiveness is based on leveraging your human capital. But if you can't do that, you're going to be left behind. So if the executives didn't think of this seriously before, it's time they do. And quite frankly, I would even argue, because everything I do is based on science and data and research. It's not from someone who wrote a book, which multitudes are coming out now, but really it's get on board with this, because you will get left behind, because the environment is changing. And unfortunately or fortunately, you know, income is dependent on people. And if the people that are with you and are working for you are not engaged, and quite frankly, just still trying to navigate this uncertain times, and you're not filling those gaps of their PC or psychological contract, you're not going to get the same result you did pre-COVID. And let's assume there was even no COVID. You're not going to get the same results year after year, because if the business doesn't align with the environment, you're already left behind. And that's why you see some of these transitions. So now, to me, it's way, way more critical than ever. You have the mental health component, but like Laura said, some of it could just be anxiety. Some of it could be as simple as, I'm disgruntled. And these breaches are simple fixes if we even acknowledge them. And I will argue to executives, now is the time that you don't have those choices. You can't just say, oh, you're not working out. I'm just, you know, you just go and I'm going to pick someone else. Because you don't have those options. The employees have those options nowadays. And you will find that the mid-range, mid-career employees are the ones who have those options, because they're the ones with the confidence, they're the ones with the self-efficacy, and it's supported by the research. Newer employees, their psychological contract is justified. It's like, oh, maybe I made a mistake in what I was thinking. This wasn't the agreement. Okay, I'll reset. And the older employees are just coasting. Or some of them even just retire earlier because they're like, I don't want to deal with this. It's your mid-range employees. Those are the ones we want. Those are the ones we need to stay, to be able to have a good succession plan. And we really need to start focusing on people, because revenue is going to be, it always has been, but it's even going to be more heavily dependent on what we do from now to who knows when with our employee mindsets.
Yeah, it's fascinating. This is a fascinating discussion. Just before I jump back over to you, Robin, I'm interested in the notion of you've got the gap in the small to medium sized business that may not have a full-time HR person. Obviously, the fractional person like your services is a potential solution. But I'm fascinated by the idea that, well, first off, I mean, it's kind of common that if senior management doesn't buy into something, then a lot doesn't happen. But at the same time, what I'm also hearing is that when we were talking at that supervisory level, it's also the employees at the same time have to fill that gap when there isn't that kind of formal HR component to sort of begin to organize and understand what that relationship could be or should be with their employer. So maybe Laura, you could comment a little bit on your thoughts related to that relationship and how employees maybe should begin to understand their role in dealing with all of this kind of contract.
So as Alu said, starting from the top and that buy-in, and sometimes those business owners, and let's remember who small and medium business owners are. They're not necessarily PhD or MBA grads. They're passionate individuals, passionate entrepreneurs who have had success in what they do, but don't necessarily have a marketing, finance, accounting, HR background to get all of those pieces put together. Maybe they've had some luck, maybe they have innate leadership, but what happens is we all of a sudden have these smaller, medium organizations where the owner says, I want this, and says to the management team, just do it, get it done. And they might not innately know themselves how to do it. And then they're telling the management and supervisory teams to do it. And the supervisory teams are like, I don't know, I've never been shown. You want me to have a great performance and development culture. I've never seen it happen before because no one's shown me. And it just falls flat. And again, coming back to that, where the employees are making up the differences in filling in those gaps. And it comes back to the communication. Everything about HR at the end of the day is communication. When HR says, I think we should have an onboarding program, it's communication. When they say we should have a performance development program, it's communication. When we say we should have, a recruitment flow that makes sense for our organization, it's communication. At the end of the day, the more communication you give at every single level, at every point in the employment cycle, is going to help reduce those gaps that the employees start making up themselves. Because if you have an onboarding and no one is talking to that new hire after 30 days, there's two things they're going, I must be doing a fantastic job, or I'm going to be fired in 45 days. Those are the two options that they have. And most likely the great people are thinking, I'm going to be fired. And the ones who aren't holding up their end of the bargain are thinking, I'm fantastic. And then it comes this problem of engagement and this problem of, all of the aspects of that roll down from that. So I think when you talk about the practical side of how do we close those gaps, is it spending big money on training? It might be. Is it investing the time into communication, which is way harder than investing money into training? Investing time in communication and having conversations and bringing it down to that level is so significantly more difficult than a company throwing money for a week for someone to go to leadership training, because money comes and goes. Time is what's so important to people and what we never have enough of.
Robin, what do you think? You come from an organization that has full-time HR resources, so you kind of sit in the middle, but you also have a more diverse, you may have a partially more diverse employee base in terms of what the expectations are. How Standpack dealing with that notion of the employee expectations and balancing out what their role in all of this as well?
Well, I think it is obviously a challenge in an organization of our size to be able to communicate the same message to everybody. But again, we're relying on our leadership team to do that, right? They should be engaged at the level that they're at. And every one of their actions, every one of the decisions that they make is supposed to be for the best for the company, right? So we need all of our leaders to let that trickle down into the workforce, that their contributions are just as important as the VP of Finance's contributions. And so, you know, I think we spend a lot of time speaking with our managers, sending out, like I said before, I had been sending out some things for our leadership team to read. I think a lot of you know, what Alu and Laura are saying about this top-down approach and how we utilize that within the organization is extremely important. And you know, the other thing is getting the right people in the seat in order to drive the organization forward. And when we're hiring people, we need to hire people that are matching the values that we hold as a company. And when we do that, we'll be successful. We'll continue being successful. As far as how we get, you know, the mid-level folks on board with that can be a challenge. And I'm not going to sit here and say that we have all the answers. We don't have all the answers. And it's been a challenge for us to convey those messages. But I think at the end of the day, when everybody comes in to work, everybody knows what the goal is. But I will go right back again to the top-down approach, is that your organizational, your strategic organizational strategy, everything that you're doing as a company has to trickle down from the top. Everybody needs to understand what their purpose is. And so when we have supervisors that don't know how to convey those messages, we need to focus on those people immediately. And we need to have them understand, you know, what their purpose is, what we're doing as a company, and how it is that their role in particular is going to move us forward. And I think, as Laura was saying, communicating this, utilizing, you can do the email thing, but it's not going to be overly effective. So getting people together and having the conversations, and maybe getting together with your shift to say, hey, here's what we accomplished this week. That's great, because we just satisfied this, and this goal that we have as a company. And the more people understand, the more that they're going to be driven to focus on those efforts when they come into work.
So to circle us back around, because all this is being done within the crazy environment of trying to figure out if we are or not coming out of COVID-19. So I'd like to get a sense of, do you think that the kind of tumult that we're facing right now with COVID-19 and hybrid work environments, and some people working from home and some not, and some wanting to and some not, do you think that has the opportunity to help right this ship and this contract and balance this out? Is it helping or hurting? That is my question. Alu, what do you think?
I think it's neither, to be honest. I think that we know COVID has caused a breach in the psychological contract. We know we've talked the past hour of leadership having a bigger role. But the question is, do they know how, right? And I think that as long as we have the training in place, that retrust of the relationship and the certainty can be built, whatever model you pick that works for your business. Laura mentioned communication several times, so did Robin. My argument is, do they trust the communication? Do they trust the communicator? That is your solve to the problem. And that'll only happen if you are trained to identify the attitudinal results relating to, hey, we have a problem here, and this has happened because of this. How do we fix it, and how do we talk about it?
I guess part of my question comes from sort of in the pre-COVID kind of traditional world. You live with entrepreneurs and business owners.
Yep.
Who maybe don't know what they don't know.
Yep.
Now COVID hits, and all of a sudden, people are starting, and as we're going through what we're going through, people are starting to understand or realize that they know they don't know a lot of things.
Yep.
which has the potential to get people to look at things in new ways and in fresh ways, where the psychological contract may have been breached, or the psychological contract was actually in transition to begin with. What are your thoughts, Laura?
Oh, John, that's a tough question.
Oh no. We got 4 minutes and you got 30 seconds and go. No, I'm just
I don't know. I'll honestly say, you know, as Alu said, that the data is in progress. We know what's happened. We don't know what's going to happen. And we don't know what's going to happen next. So the problem with the whole thing, as I see it, is even if a small business owner or managers want to change, if they see that there's a need or they feel that inside of them, we're in this position right now where people are just darn tired. And that's the other aspect of the change that we need to go through. And I'm sure all of us around this panel have felt that at some point, where you're just done. And so the problem with that as well is that probably even in this panel, we all hit those points at different times. If we all worked for one organization that said, hey, we're going gung-ho on this now, at some point, all of us would have been disengaged with that whole process. Because of the environment we're in, because of the changes, because of that constant fight or flight that we've been in, it exasperates the motivation even to change, even when you want to. I guess it's like being on a hamster wheel with a diet and exercise program. Even when you know you need to change, the concept of it is exhausting. So I think we have to get back to some basics first. I think we need to scale it back and start thinking of one objective at a time from an internal human resource and internal psychological contract program. Or I don't want to call it a program, but a concept.
Yeah.
Because if we start rapid firing this, none of those bullets are going to hit.
And I guess too, part of the challenge is where organizations, because we all had to really worked hard through the most acute phase of the crisis to really try to rise to the occasion and to that notion of getting tired. But that kind of concept, like whenever you finished your university exams, everybody got sick because as soon as you can stand down a little bit, then then everything just kind of drops off. What are you finding, Robin? I know we only have a couple of minutes, and I haven't even talked about vaccine policies. So sorry, Dolores. Robin, what do you think? Just quickly, in terms of the ability of an organization to continue through the change, even though we're kind of going past that acute phase and the fatigue that Laura was talking about.
I think there's a lot of factors to consider in that question. And I don't think there's one blanket response for all organizations out there. Everyone's a different size, everyone has different goals. Do I think that we can keep going like this? It's hard to say. It's hard to say from my perspective, because I know how Standpax fared throughout this crisis, but other organizations are not able to keep things up as well, or they don't have the resources or the focus that some other organizations will. And I think that's just how we're looking at things right now, is that it's a bit of a mystery. And I don't believe every organization can maintain this level going forward, but I think some can. And that's exactly how I feel. So.
Well, that's all the time that we have. This has been an absolutely tremendous discussion. Robin, Alu, and Laura, I'd like to thank you for joining us for this. And actually, it blends really well with what it is that we're doing next Tuesday morning, because we'll be focusing on the impact of mental health from the healthcare perspective. And we'll be joined with Dr. Hirji, who is Niagara's Acting Medical Officer of Health and Commissioner for Public Health, as well as Nancy Garner from the Quest Community Health Center. Karen Pat as well will join us, and she is the Assistant Professor at the Department of Health Sciences at Brock University. So it's going to be interesting to pick up on this conversation where we've been doing it from the HR perspective and pick it up from the healthcare perspective and dig deeper into this discussion. So I'd like to thank everybody for joining us. And again, I apologize for not getting to vaccine policies. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.